anthem. Thank you very much. And I welcome you. It is my pleasure to welcome you to this forum entitled The Restorative Tree, Black Family Genealogy and White America, Replanting and Reclaiming American Family Histories and Stories, a Colorizing Restorative Justice Project. Before we go forward, I know there's probably more people who will be coming online. I'd just like to ask for those who have their cameras on and those who have their cameras off, if you can just greet each other either by a square Zoom box with a name or a picture, but just take a look at everybody's box and just greet them, whether you can see their picture or not. So let's just take a second to just greet each one silently. Thank you for that. I'd like to right now just ask for permission to get started. And I'd like for someone to just wave their hands across the screen. Anybody, just give me permission with a wave. All right, I saw a couple of waves. Thank you for that. It is okay to have your cameras off. That is just fine. Actually, it helps with communication and the bandwidth. So it is your choice and your option. Cameras off are just fine with us. This is a restorative process, so pretty much everything is pretty fine with us. I definitely have to acknowledge those who made this possible. You, the participants in the audience, our guests who will be here today, our facilitators, the team, the restorative team. I also like to acknowledge Rachel. She was one of the people in the background. And definitely Living Justice Press and Silicon Valley Community Foundation. And I definitely like to acknowledge Native Americans for sharing their way of doing justice and share their way of community building. I'm gonna do a little housekeeping. If I can go to the housekeeping. Yeah, there you go. All right, we're together now. I'm gonna do a little housekeeping real quick. We definitely just like to ask when you do speak, please speak and listen from your heart and with respect. And remember when you're sharing, share just enough so others can speak if you decide to speak. And of course, you don't have to speak. Passing is beautiful in this process here. We do ask that you use I statements when you speak. I versus you or we. Speak from your perspective. Speak from what you feel, your stories, your experience. This is a restorative process, so for those who are familiar with it, after 20 years, I do try to speak from my perspective. However, I catch myself not doing it sometimes, so it is human to say we, you. I also like for us to consider non-judgment of others' comment. I like to say, don't touch other people's words. So whatever you bring to the space, it's yours. It is yours. And we ask no one to touch whatever you bring to the space. Thank you for that. Let's see, we want to get down to, let's see, I'm finished with housekeeping. Why don't we go to the purpose? Thank you so much. Zoom technology. Let me tell you real quickly about the purpose of this. It is about racial relationships. It is about African genealogy. It's about restorative principles. And quite a few things can come out of there. It is our hope that whatever is brought today is your story, your experience. We are so not looking for Google today. So if it can be Google, we hope that you would let us wait until after the program and we'll read up on it. But other than that, your experiences, your stories, this is what this space is for. I'd like to real quickly, if the technology, I'm going to throw you in a loop. I want to share a screen, and I think you made me co-host so I can do this. And so let me share a screen with you real quick. They didn't know anything about this. Slip this in the back door. All right, here it goes. I want to talk about where did this come from, this idea, real quickly. I grew up around my grandparents, and my grandmother was born in 1898. All my grandparents was born in 1800. And I thought they was the oldest people on earth, and I knew they were slaves. And I used to always say, hey, grandmama, you remember anything growing up? And she'd look at me like, yeah, I remember all my mother, my father, my sisters, my brothers. And I thought it was amazing somebody that old could remember their family members. And so as I got older, I participated in a program for my master's degree, and I researched this family for a couple of years. And then I thought, I don't know nothing about my own people. I'm doing all this research on somebody else's family, and I have a 100-year-old grandmother, and I know nothing. So it started me to do what I call professional genealogy work. I spent 3 years and about $10,000, and that's not a lot of money when I look at, I took $200 or $300 a month that I usually go to the movies with, buy something new with. I saved it to use it for the project. And once I finished, I came up with this book called A Dust of Flower. And it's just about my family. There's no secrets in there. There's no big family stuff. It's just about my family, my grandmother's walk. That led me to something else. Doing that story led me to a 100-year-old ledger that my great grand uncle kept. And I found this ledger, got contacted from a cousin. She says, I have something. I want to know if there's anything. And she gave it to me. I'm like, you giving me this? She said, yeah, I don't know what to do with it. So I took the ledger, made one copy, took it straight to the Georgia Archives. And I was told at the time, Secretary of State, no archives had ever seen a 100-year-old Black ledger, a business ledger. They just never seen one. And so they stored that ledger, which is stored now. I copyrighted. So if you find something old in your family, go ahead and get the rights to it and then give it away. And so I shared it with the archives, and they have it now there. But that kind of led me to all the research on my family. And it led me up into Kay Prentice about 20 years ago, training me in restorative. So now I realize restorative justice and genealogy is my love, my passion. That's what I put on this earth for, those two things. Yay, I know. It took me a long time, but I know now. So I'm happy about it. And I'm always trying to figure out, how can I bring these two together? Restorative and genealogy makes no sense. And eventually, when you stick with what your passion is, that cell will pop, my brain finally popped. And so I brought this idea of, why do I have to research my family when my family wasn't responsible for being taken out of Africa? I don't know my cousins who are there now. I don't know my community, my culture. I don't know anything. When I say I know nothing, that ain't right to me. Now, this is my voice. And so I thought, well, how come those European descendants can't help me? They ought to help me. And then I thought, well, if they help me, I wonder if that'll make me just like white people a little bit more. You know, it's like a little test, and being honest. You know, maybe I just like them because I love my family, and you helping me find my people. This just, makes me jump for joy. So it came up with this idea. But doing my research, I found out in my research, my mother has a twin sister. That is my mother and her twin sister. And I did my DNA. My mother always told me that I was Native American. Well, I did my DNA. It said I didn't have a drop of Native American. It said I had Russian in me. You know, they like to kill me dead. Russian, of all things. What happened, Mama? You said we were Native. But to make a long story short, I did my DNA, and my DNA came out and said that my aunt was my mama. No, my aunt ain't my mama. My mama is Louise Bernice is my aunt. It's in black and white, as big as it can be on my DNA outcome. I thought, well, how did they miss that? They messed that up pretty bad. But then I found out twin sisters' children look like they belong to each other. Okay. So my DNA, 98% match my aunt. And there's no doubt that's your mama. They just don't want to say 100, but she's not my mama. There's so many problems in research, and that could be a common problem in any cultural community. But in Black research, you run into phonics. My great-great-grandmother's name is Tucson. I don't know how to spell Tucson. I've been looking for Tucson forever. I can't find it, and it might have just been written wrong. I found out my pastor was my cousin doing my DNA. Just so many stories that comes out of doing your own family research. I also found out that, of course, one of my grandmothers was mulatto. That wasn't a shock. But the biggest thing of all was the 1914 ledger that I was beginning to speak about, that I found on my uncle. This is my uncle. And there was a governor in Georgia named Talmadge. My uncle's name is Talmadge. I said, oh, we related to the Talmadge. Auntie said, no, baby, that ain't how it happened. Says your uncle, said the great uncle, when they was freed, they took the name of Talmadge because they were good to their slaves. I said, oh, that means we ain't related to the governor? No, sister, you ain't related to the governor. They took the name. So now I realize that most Africans may not know that many Black slaves who were freed took their name. They gave themselves their name. Some might have been directly to the master, but most they created their name. And so there's so many things to find out in researching your DNA. I threw this one in. They were not aware I was going to do this one, the team. And then the last one's just the picture of the Secretary of State at that time. And that's me on the right. It don't look like me, but that's me. Handing it over to the Georgia Archives. And that's my aunt on the left who gave it to me. They didn't know what to do with it. So right now, if you go to Georgia Archives, please go and take a look at my one of the oldest, if not the only, 100-plus-year-old business ledger by a Black man who calculated every nickel and dime in and out his house, in and out of his hand. He wrote down what they were doing in the community, who were they supporting. He practiced his ABCs at the back of the book. He lined up, I was educated, you line up your decimal points. He lined up his decimal points and answers. It's a wonderful ledger to see. It's in a room where the paper wasn't designed to live for 100 years, especially back then. So they have it in a special control room where they put it on a special big cushion, and somebody stands over you and watch you to make sure you don't take a page or you don't write over it. So it's very well preserved out of my house, but my family has the rights. And I learned that from Dr. Martin Luther King when he didn't have the rights to I Have a Dream. I learned that you always do the rights to something that you like to claim. So thank you for that. I want to exit out of that. And I hope I'm still here with you. So let me get back on track real quickly. If we can go to the restorative team, real quickly, I want to introduce my restorative team. Let me just wait for them to catch up with me. It will be number 8. Okay. You're making it. There you go, restorative team. Come on back. This is our team here. All 5 of us who have worked for the last, this year on this particular project. And I just want to real quickly give them a little bit more spotlight. Nikita, this is Nikita. And she has, I've known her since, some years now, from Austin, Texas. And if you want to just real quickly read a little bit about Nikita. Okay, SY wants to see SY. All right, SYB. All right, that's okay. We can go to SYB, and then our next person, Ken. Okay, SYB with the tech team. Here is Ken. Really quickly, Ken has been around me and Restorative for, since 2012, 13, quite a few years. Thank you, Ken. The next person, Maria. Okay, there you go. You got Maria there. Met Maria last year, and she's been my right and left hand and everything else. I appreciate you, Maria. And then last, there's me, Janice Jerome, as part of this team. Thank you for that. Real quickly, I just wanted to let you take a look at our guests here today. And if you're in this room, chances are you did receive the flyer here, our guests. We'll introduce them more as they speak. And then the next group I just wanted you to see is our facilitators. They are all certified restorative facilitators by RJIA, and we will reintroduce them again in our next screen. Thank you so much. So the chat box, what has been on your mind lately? I welcome you during this entire forum to put your thoughts on what has been on your mind about restorative, about African-American family history tracing, and reparations. And so that is a all-day invitation to chat with us. Next, we're actually going to begin the reason why we're here. We will start our session 1. How about that? We will look at and listen to thought leaders from anti-racism, reparation, genealogy, and restorative principles and practices. So before you do the next slide, is Michelle, I just want to know, is Michelle Armster in the room? I didn't get a chance.
I am in the room.
That's good. So let me go ahead and give me my slide on Michelle. And I'm gonna give y'all a few seconds, just read about Michelle. Let's just take a few seconds to read about Michelle. All right, thank you so much. So Michelle, I'm just gonna start out by asking you, how do you feel right now? That's okay, I love it.
I would have to admit that I'm curious about the conversation, and I hope that I will be able to add significantly or substantially to the conversation. So that's what I'm feeling right now. I care for my mother, and so her caregiver was here. And then today is the day that the house cleaners come in, but everybody's gone, so I'm good.
Thank you.
Shouldn't be any noise.
Well, Michelle, I'll tell you how this works. We're going to spend about 20 minutes with you, each guest, and we're going to ask a few questions about, who you are, what you do, and then we're going to ask you some questions about reparations and restorative, but mainly about the real question that got us here today. What if African American research was done by white America as a form of reparation? And what would the outcome be? So Michelle, my first question to you is, where were you born and where did you grow up?
My father and mother were both military, so I may have been born in Colorado, but that is not what I call home, because I lived both domestically and in states in the United States as well as internationally because of my father's job. So in some ways, wherever I am is what I call home.
Did you ever know your grandparents or
Yes.
great grandparents? And do you know where they possibly were born or lived?
I know, I know both of my grandparents. I did not know face to face my great grandparents, but one of the things when I was in seminary, one of the classes that I took was to do a genealogy. So I have documentation here going back as far as my great greats on both my father and my mother's side.
Okay. Well, you kind of already answered quite a few questions with that one question. Thank you so much for that. Um, do you know the oldest living person in your family right now? If
My
so,
mother, she's upstairs.
okay. How old is she?
She will be 84 October 25th.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, do you have any family rituals or anything that your family does special together as a
Eat,
family, as a unit?
eat, eat, and you better cook it right. Like don't have white bread dressing. That just is not that doesn't even make any sense. You know, there are
Yeah.
just certain foods that are just a must at any family gathering or any uh any coming together and you must have greens. I mean, like greens and cornbread. Then you just put everything else with it. I mean, so food, I think, is where most of us, think of that documentary called the documentary High on the Hog, and I watched it with my mother, and she was high on the hog watching that documentary about
Okay,
Black
thank
Southern food, right?
you.
So
So some of the questions might be obvious, and then sometimes they're not. I was always told never to ASSUME.
mhm, mhm.
What is what cultural identity are you? What community do you identify with?
I identify as a woman of African descent born in America.
Okay, thank you for that. Have you ever wished that you were born of some other race? And just a simple,
Yeah.
I want to get into the heart, but uh, just maybe a quick response. Have you ever?
Yeah, when I was like 7, 8 years old, we lived in New Mexico, and I was very attracted to the indigenous people that lived there, and they were the Apache and the Navajo and the Hopi. And so always went to the marketplace, and I would say that I would say, oh, I would like to be an Apache. And so I go home and I started reading about Apache, and I thought, shoot, they're treated just as bad as we are. So,
Yes.
that would probably be the only, other than that, no.
Okay, thank you for that. So I'm going to ask you, because I identify you with one of my sisters in restorative, I'm
Mhm,
going to ask you a question.
mhm.
Are you able to listen to others share their views on the subject of reparations without interrupting them, judging them, or commenting on that person's views or values? Are you able to do that?
I would say that I am, because I am curious. I'm curious to know how other people think. I'm curious to know, um, just language is really important. So we say restorative justice, and we assume that people, one, define it or understand it the same way, and two, we assume that people have the same shared values. We talk about restorative justice practices, restorative justice values, and restorative justice principles. And I think, one, it's just important for me to understand how
Okay.
people understand. And to understand somebody else doesn't mean you have to agree with them. So I don't lose anything by listening to people.
Okay. Thank you for that. If you can just give us a quick glimpse or, in a couple of lines, your chosen career and anything that excites you or concerns you. I don't know how much time we got left, but just a quick glimpse of your chosen career and what excites you and what concerns you.
Well, right now, I am the executive director for a regional faith-based agency. It's an international NGO. And I am the executive director for the Central States region, where we do, our mission is relief, development, and peace in the name of Christ. We are in 51 countries. We have over 600 partners. We also have as strategic goals to address the racial disparities of mass incarceration. We do teaching and learning around the doctrine of discovery. We respond to the issues along the southern border of the United States. And so the work that I do is about connecting with people, recognizing how white supremacy continues to impact the lives of people, and also to respond in ways that it's about justice, justice for all of God's creation. And that includes Mother Earth.
Thank you for that. What comes to mind when you think of the word reparation?
Well, I think reparations is about repairing the harm. And so that's basically what comes to mind. I think it's more complex than that, right? I mean, for those of us of African descent, so let me just say, I don't see our healing, and that is persons of African descent. I don't see our healing happening without solidarity with our indigenous brothers and sisters. You know, I just want to do this at this time, Janice, because it's important for me to acknowledge that the land that I am on and the history that brought my ancestors to this stolen land. So first, I acknowledge the original people, the indigenous people who live and have lived, thrive, and have thrived for thousands of years on this land that they call Turtle Island. And this land on which I live, this stolen land, is called the state of Kansas. However, Kansas is not the name of the original people. The people that were and are the Ka. And the city that I live in is called Wichita, after the Wichita people. This land was and is also home for the Sac and Fox, the Pawnee, the Cheyenne, and for many others whose language and people are no longer here because of genocide, extermination, disease, forced displacement. And these people had families, they had communities, they had ways of being, and they had faith. And second, it's important for me to acknowledge my ancestors, the stolen people, the Mende of Sierra Leone and the Bassa of Burkina Faso. We too are people stolen from the continent of Africa. We are not settlers, we are displaced people. And our bodies were stolen, and like our indigenous brothers and sisters, our language was stolen, our identities were erased, and we too had families, communities, and ways of being and faith. And so I take this time to acknowledge and celebrate that we are all still here. I believe that when I acknowledge the legacy of the indigenous peoples and that their land was stolen, and when I acknowledge the legacy of my ancestors and that we were stolen, I defy the lie of white supremacy that values domination, property, and things over people. So we can then celebrate the truth that we are still here.
Thank you for that. So as I listen to you talk about Native Americans and their ancestors, my question to you is, when you think about reparation, what should it address? What should it address? Race and racism? Should it address the justice system, economics, all of that? What should reparation address? And I'm gonna put two sentences in there so maybe you can get it all out at once. What should it address? And do you think there is an acceptable way to put a cash value on the trauma and pain of slavery? So what should it address? And do you think that you can put a cash value?
So as restorative justice practitioners, we know that the goal is healing, healing of ourselves, healing of our communities, healing of relationships. So the first thing that I would say in terms of reparations is I don't think there is possibly to put a cash value on what reparations is. I also think it's complex, and as persons of African descent, we always talk about, well, I want my 40 acres and a mule. And I want to also ask us, and where are the 40 acres going to come from? Because this was stolen land. So, this is a really complex issue of reparations. I do not think white people would need to do my history. I can do my history. And I think doing our own history is a way for us to heal. Doing our own history is a way for us to realize where we and how we connect to the indigenous people of this land. So, cash doesn't appeal to me. We're talking about dismantling. We need to dismantle racism. And what does that look like? Abolish the police system. The police system was designed to capture runaway enslaved Africans. And so we've got an issue with we have an issue with the education system. Money is not going to help us deal with the institutional, the systemic, the oppression of white supremacy. We need to go after those institutions and those systems that are designed to keep people of color out and designed to uplift white supremacy. So it's a more complicated conversation.
Thank you for that. You've kind of answered quite a few of my questions. So you talked about the 40 acres and a mule. Let me ask you that. To successfully transition to freedom, the Freedmen's Bureau suggested that slave families were to receive 40 acres and a mule. Do you think if this had been implemented, this would have made a significant difference in the lives and economy of African Americans today?
Yes, I would. I mean, but we also know that there were persons of African descent that did get land, and then the land was systematically, due to white supremacy, taken away, burned out. I mean, that was a common practice, so yes, if it could have been done with the understanding that this belongs to you, but again, this issue of owning land is one of the tools of white supremacy. You can own land, you can own people, because what happened to the indigenous people were they were pushed off their land and sent to reservations, and the reservation, that land was the worst land. So again, that land thing is just as complex. I would say yes, if it were done according to what they said they were going to do, but it really wasn't a reality, and they weren't for real.
Okay. Thank you for that. Well, do you think a proposal for genealogy would be accepted as a form of reparations for African Americans?
No, I really don't. I think a genealogy, what would be wonderful if this proposal for genealogy were to help persons of African descent search their own genealogy, because I know for me, I know that matrilineally, I am Mende of Sierra Leone. Patrilineally, I'm Bissa of Burkina Faso. And when I was able to find that is when the healing began for me. But it was because that I worked on that for myself, and so we can collectively help one another out. That's going to be the healing that we need in order to even engage in whatever the next level is that we are articulating. I really, I just have to say, white people doing my genealogy just ain't gonna work. Nope, nope.
All right, one of my last questions to you is, restorative practices seek to address and repair harm and build relationships. Do you think the harm connected to the trauma of slavery is repairable?
You know, I think so. I think of that, and I don't know the name of it, but there's this kind of pottery in Japan where they make this beautiful pot and then they break it and then they put it back together with gold filigree. Now, it may not be useful as a pot, but it's useful as something else because there's that gold filigree and it makes it beautiful. And I think 400 years of dealing with white supremacy for African persons of African descent and 600 years of dealing with white supremacy for indigenous people. That's it. Thank you, Kintsugi. So thank you, Leaf. I think we can, that is a lot. We need another 400 years, 400 years of prayer. Then in 400 years, my prayer is the children will be better. I honestly, what I will say, however, and I will put a plug out, there is a process called emotional emancipation circles, and it's designed for persons of African descent. And it is a process, a circle process of working with persons of African descent. And it's even international. So it's even being implemented on the African continent, as well as Central and South America, where there's a large population of persons of African descent. And there's also, things like Sawabono circles. So, and these are all based on Afrocentric practices. Whether it's Indaba from South Africa or sitting on the Oada tree in Ethiopia, there are practices that persons of African descent practice. We used to call it sitting around the kitchen table. So when we begin to understand the richness of who we are and our culture, I think that is what is needed before we can engage in any kind of, restorative, transformative work. And again, I think that we as persons of African, we need to work with the indigenous persons. That's where this is going to come. So it's going to take 400 years. This has been going on for 400 years, and it'll take another 400 years.
Well, Michelle, we thank you for being here today, and thank you for the words that you left in this space. I do look forward to more connections with you and hope you're able to stay on and hear the rest of our guests. So thank you very much for being here.
It was my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
All right. And so now we will move to our next guest. I will just wait for my tech team. And it should be Dryson Heath. All right. There you go. I'm going to give you a little minute to read about Dryson. All right. We'll make it there. There you go. So I'll give you a few seconds to read about Miss Heath and reparations. Is Miss Heath here in the room with us? Is Dryson here? Make sure she's here.
Hi, yes, I'm
Hey,
here.
there you go. There you go. Well, welcome. Glad to have you here. Just want to ask you right now first, how do you feel right now, right this minute? How do you feel?
First, I just want to say thank you, and I'm so grateful to be in this space. Janice, your team has been doing incredible work, and we need we need this restorative space today. Um, and just reintroducing myself as Dreesen Heath, a researcher and advocate at Human Rights Watch. How I'm feeling, I'm holding a lot in this week. Um, and I'm holding frustrations for the very things that we're talking about today around reparations and its advancement in this country. Uh, the kind of backdoor deals and hoops that the government has the people it's accountable to jumping through just to meet a demand that they should be fulfilling, a promise that is long overdue that needs to be delivered, continues to be stalled. I'm sick and tired of that. I'm holding a lot of personal loss and trauma in this space, but I'm also holding, intentional listening to my fellow panelists and speakers, because part of this is a bit liberating to be even have space to talk about this, to even have space to be in community with other people that care about the progress of us individually, but also as a collective. I'm tired of seeing the harm. Not just tired, but it's maddening. These are both policy institutional choices, systemic, designs, not failures, but also people that just are willing to continue to bargain on the backs of Black people. And I'm at my wit's end, even in my younger life here. That doesn't mean the work doesn't stop; it only intensifies. But it's clear that the obstructionists, it doesn't matter what party you are, obstructionists are on all sides of the aisle. So that's how I feel today.
Thank you for that. I'd like to ask you a little bit about your cultural identity and where were you raised or born, and a little bit about your family background. Where, as far as you can go back, did you know your grandparents or your great, and where did they live? So where were you born, your cultural identity, and your family lineage?
Sure. I identify as Black. As we are within this constructed construct, and I'm placed within the system that identifies me with the treatment of other Black people and descendants of Africans in this country. I have, I do know, my grandparents. I grew up with both sets of grandparents on both sides. And on my dad's side, folks are from deeper in the South, Alabama, Eastern Shore, Maryland on my maternal, dad's maternal side. So places like Trapp, Maryland, where that was a huge plantation site. On my mom's side, also from Alabama, cotton plant in Little Rock, Arkansas. And so I know I'm a descendant of enslaved people. I have not been able to connect all the dots yet, but do have some electronic family trees. And it's been interesting to know ancestors dating back to at least the early 1800s, but not been able to confirm anyone beyond or before that point.
Thank you for that. Can we talk a little bit about HR 40 for those who might not be familiar with it? Can you just share with us the things that are important to you to share with us about HR 40?
Yeah, I mean, HR 40 is a federal bill to set up an investigative commission to investigate the legacy of enslavement in this country. So not just the period of enslavement itself, but the continuing injury that the federal government, along with colluding with private actors, have facilitated on Black people for centuries. And so, a lot of misconceptions around the bill are, well, you're just talking about the period of enslavement. We're actually talking about post-emancipation discrimination as well, de facto, de jure segregation. We're still seeing the impacts of racialized segregation today. Or else we would see equal access to healthcare. We would see home ownership and land ownership look different. We would see Black people being able to have their family pictures up when their home gets appraised and not having to replace them with white families' pictures. And so we see the impacts of that today, the policing systems, the criminal legal system. And that needs to be addressed, and there needs to be recommended remedies that are proportional to the sizes of those harms. Now, those harms are vast, but under international human rights law, reparation is not some abstract concept. It's a right, the right to reparation and remedy due to a government's violation, but also due to their omission and neglect of a people that they are supposed to govern. Or they have governing authority over, and have created the conditions, the material conditions that these people are under. So there is an obligation to account for that. And I'm excited about, no, I don't want another study to just be on somebody's shelf collecting dust. Yes, we have a lot of data. Yes, we have the historic and present context, but also the main perpetrator has just been let off the hook. They have never comprehensively chronicled the injuries that they have inflicted, not just through institutions, but through current policies and laws that are still active today, and through laws that have been outlawed, but they've never implemented any structural policies or abolition to systems that continue to perpetuate the harm. So with HR 40, I see the possibility of not only this, way to put truth on a national stage in a way that the government, along with centering, the most important part of these commission processes are that the people directly impacted are a part of every single step and leading every single step. And that you can only determine effective remedies in this case if people directly injured are, commissioners or giving, witness testimony or are, giving input and designing the recommendations and remedies that are necessary. So I'm glad that it's a national conversation now. There's still so much misconception about this bill alone, which is a commission to, give recommendations. And I know there's a lot of people frustrated by that, but that's not mutually exclusive from a direct proposal for reparations that could be introduced at the federal level at any time. We're seeing states and locales and institutions take it up on their own. But without federal action, slavery was national policy, redlining was national policy, urban renewal programs were conducted at the national level, carried out then by local governments, eminent domain practices at multiple levels, the institutions at the federal level to cage people. These are national policies. They need to be dealt with on that scale. So without federal action on reparations soon, we're in continued deep trouble.
Thank you for that. I'm going to ask you a question. It's kind of a mouthful. Which group of US-born African Americans should be the recipient if you agree with reparation benefits? Should it be those who can prove they are descendants of slavery, those over 18, those with at least one US born African American parent, anyone who declares themselves Black in the United States? Those are just examples. Who or which group of people should be recipient of this?
Yeah. So when you understand the range of harms that have been inflicted on descendants of enslaved Africans in this country, when you understand the transatlantic slave trade and how your family, could have been in between the islands in Texas and being traded that way because it was a trans global slave trade. When we understand that the harm, the killing of innocent Black women and men and children in today's society, where when someone identifies a Black person was killed by the police, they're not saying that this person was a Jamaican American or having some type of immigrant status. They're categorizing that person. When you are perceived as Black in the US, there are specific harms that you're going to experience because of that perceived notion. So I think this question is complex, and that people cannot continue to say, you need to putting the burden. So this is my issue. The burden of proof should not be put on the injured parties. We know that destruction of records was also a form of violence in this country. We can't go to Ellis Island and point to where our ancestors came from, what day, how, what items they brought. There are some people that have their records. There's some people that have pictures of their forefathers. There's a lot of other people that don't. And so I know this is, yes, you're like, so then how do we determine how, there's going to have to be tiers to this. There were some people that were enslaved in the US versus on the islands, but they still, are experiencing racial discrimination today. And reparations is targeted. You don't just have one form that fits all. That's not what the process is for. The process is so that you can connect a specific harm to a specific group of people. You identify the harm first. You identify all who was impacted, and then you move forward with the remedy. But there are several multitude of harms. So we have to be open to, okay, if we're just talking about the period of enslavement, let's deal with this. But again, there's gotta be some conversations about the burden of proof here. Then we also have to talk about, the current impacts of those policies today on families who have been here for generations, but may have been enslaved by another colonial power. But we can't just neglect the fact that there is pervasive racial discrimination and exploitation of all people who are identified as Black, African American, and descendants of enslaved Africans.
As we come to a close, Kat, I want to ask you two questions at one time. First one is, what brought us here today? How do you feel about white Americans researching your family history? And the second question is, do you think the trauma and pain associated with slavery and finding a form of reparation, do you think that trauma and pain is repairable? So the first question, how do you feel about white American researching your family, just your family history? And do you think the trauma and pain of slavery is even repairable?
Yeah, I mean, so I would welcome anyone who would want to explore my family's history. I also left out that I was born in Tulsa, Oklahoma, the site of, one of the worst and gravest human rights violations, attack, genocidal act on Black people in this country. And so, that's also something I carry in my familial lineage, and that people are still finding out today that the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre happened. I would encourage folks as a form of just recognition of, my last name, that ain't, that's not a Black last name or African last name. Heath is, as Anglo-Saxon as you can get. Irish roots on my mom's paternal side, Urquhart, a variation of Eckerd, is also, deep English roots. And so I would encourage that as an interpersonal form of reparative justice. Will that fix my wounds? I'm not sure. Will that fix my family's wounds? I'm not sure. But it went to your second question. Is all this repairable, basically? And I love Michelle's thoughts on this, which are similar to mine. But I'm also, when policing systems were instituted to catch newly freed people, they figured that out in as much, span of time as they needed to set up that institution. It's evolved and entrenched itself in so many different forms today. Why can't we undo that in the matter of time that it took them to set it up? It shouldn't have to take us 400 years to abolish that abusive system, when all they did was say, these people don't deserve dignity and recognition of their humanity. We already enslaved them. We need to watch them and profile them now. So when I think about the systems that were built up, when I think about the FHA's underwriting manual, which explicitly carves out areas that we don't want to sell. Not only do we not want to sell land and housing resources to Black people, we're also going to paint them in a very dehumanizing picture in our instruction manual. This is replicated across state lines, across local lines. And so I think there's going to have to be a multifaceted approach. We need reparations efforts at the local level, at the institutional level, at the state level, and a massive, massive program at the federal level. We spent $300 million every day for a war that we should have never been in. $300 million, over $2 trillion, and we'll get an even larger bill in a couple years, next year, when we're also calculating some of that damage. And you're telling me we can't talk about rehabilitative resources, we can't talk about free trauma-informed care for Black people, we can't talk about closing the wealth gap through compensation, not just for lost slave wages, but for banking discrimination and employment discrimination. You're telling me we can't talk about expungement of records for people that have been wrongfully convicted. We can't talk about structural changes. We can't talk about abolition. We can't talk about return of land. I know that was a question earlier today, and that's absolutely going to have to be in consultation with Indigenous and Native communities. But there are also places like Oklahoma, which have a unique history of Black people being enslaved by 5 Native American tribes who got land through a legalized treaty. And that land was then upended, and they were massacred on their own land. And that land is now owned by 3 white entities today, all of that land that was owned by Black people. So it's a nuanced conversation. I do think that we can put a dent into anything that we want to. We've put a dent in destroying our social safety net. We put a dent in destroying the lives and homes of Black people. So why can't we? There's enough resources to do what we need to thrive. We're going to have to do community-oriented and collective exercises to get there, but we're also going to have to make sure that the perpetrators pay.
Thank you so much. I'd like to thank you, Dreesen, for being here today. And I noticed there's something on your t-shirt. I can't quite read it, but I want to read it. Reparations for Greenwood. All right. Thank you so much.
Justice for Greenwood.
Well, thank you so much. I hope that you are able to stay around and listen to the rest of the guests and be part of our breakout circles. Thank you so much.
Thank
for
you.
That. I think we have up next is, yeah, there you go. Tom Kunish. Tom, are you here with us today?
Yes, I am. It's
Great.
Kunish.
Kunish. I don't do good with name pronunciation. I thank you so much for correcting me. I don't see you yet, but I know you're here.
Oh,
I hear your voice.
well, my videos, let me see. I think
There
it's
you
ads.
go.
Okay.
There you go. Well, welcome, welcome. Just tell us real quickly, just how are you feeling right this minute? How are you feeling?
I'm feeling cool. It was 46 degrees here outside of Nashville this morning. I could get dressed with shirt and pants on and go out and be cool, walking the dog. It was, I grew up in Minnesota, so I like cool mornings, and it's nice to feel the turn of the season. So I'm feeling good and cool.
Excellent.
And it's bright and sunny and the rain has stopped finally.
Thank you so much for that. Tell us about your cultural identity and a little bit about your parent or paternal or maternal background lineage.
I was born in St. Paul, Minnesota, as were my mom and dad. My grandpa I found out that my grandpa was moved down at the age of 1. His mom moved the family from Fort Berthold Reservation. There's Standing Rock, Lakota, and they moved themselves from Fort Berthold down to St. Paul to be near Minnesota State Prison, where her husband, a white guy, was being held for bigamy, being punished for bigamy against her. He abandoned her out at Fort Berthold and then left to see his family, or for his family, back in Duluth. And when they caught him and put him in prison, she moved to be near him, and he abandoned the family again. So that's how that side of the family got there. And then my dad's side of the family was settlers, and settled or came over from Bohemia to Cleveland, and then settled in and got land in Nebraska, and then moved up to Minnesota, and moved down to St. Paul, or his dad did, because he wasn't getting the farm.
Tell me a little bit about the oldest living member of your family right now. Do you know
Yeah.
who it is and where do they live?
Yep. That would be my Uncle Howie, and he's 96 years old, and he lives in Wyoming. I haven't talked with him for 20, 30 years since we had his mom's 100th birthday party in St. Paul. But I have a couple questions for him now that I've got to go ask him.
So have you or anyone in your family researched your family history? And what would be the most challenging news for you to accept about your ancestors? So first, have your family history been researched by anyone? And what would be the most challenging news to accept about your ancestors?
I have a couple cousins who do sides, but I've been the biggest family researcher. Since 1980, we had stories that we were related to Sitting Bull. And I wanted to see if that was true. And and it isn't. But it's interesting. I understood now, or began understanding, how people change family history in order to reflect the best things about themselves or to compensate for injustice on one side. They flip the side. But anyway, so I do it.
Okay, okay. And have you ever been told by someone in your family, be careful tracing our family tree. You never know what might fall out. Have you ever heard that phrase? And if so, what did it mean to you?
My dad told me that his mom said that there was an Indian in the closet and of his family. His was the white family. And both his parents had blue eyes, and his three brothers had blue eyes. And he was the only one that was dark haired and dark eyed. And so that's what we heard. It turns out that there was no Native American on that side, and that it really was a question of a woman getting pregnant after her husband was dead, and name changes. The name was really McCarthy, but they used the name Dunbar to because of the Catholic discrimination out on the East Coast.
Okay.
But apart from that, that was the only challenge or idea.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about your career work. What do you do? How long have you been doing it? And what excites you about it and what concerns you?
My undergraduate degree was in Spanish, and then I got so enthralled with religion that I changed to religious studies and then to divinity to see if I could practice religious leadership in a liberal denomination. And that's what I do, kind of, sort of. Mostly, I'm here. My wife and I have 4 daughters, and because she makes more money than I do, and because we had to move up here, I'm taking care of the daughters as she works. So I've been a teacher, and on the side, I advocate for cultural preservation of indigenous lands here in Tennessee with the Tennessee Ancient Sites Conservancy and with the Chattanooga Intertribal Association and various other things, organizations.
Tell me what comes to your mind when you hear the word reparations.
I think of repair. I think of fixing things, of setting things right. I think of, mostly I think of damage done around here in Nashville to native sites and in Chattanooga, the wholesale demolition of them. And I think of those sites being repaired. I think of reparations paid to African Americans for the theft of their labor, for slavery, for the promise of 40 acres and a mule and never getting it. I think of how the insurance company paid off our family when my dad was accidentally killed, how the insurance company paid out for one life for what he would have been earning afterwards and how those earnings would have affected the rest of us in the family. I have 12 brothers and sisters. And so it was interesting to see how they could put a price on that absence, on that taking, and pay it out. So that's what I think canon should be done everywhere else.
Do you think that America has provided reparations to other cultures outside of the African American community?
Not that I know of,
Okay.
not among everything that my family got, as my mom was a member of the tribe, came out of treaty stuff. And even then, it was far less than what the treaty said should be paid. So when the reservation land was divided up, and then they put a price on it, renting it out to what was a white Russian farmer on Standing Rock, it wasn't market price. And we weren't getting, family wasn't getting that value for the land. And then, of course, they were advocating for everybody to sell off the land. So I don't know of any other group. We get free, or my nieces and nephews have gone to school for free in at the University of Minnesota in Morris. But that was part of the treaty, and the huge land taking is not reparation. It's not compensation at all.
Why do you think some people are against reparations? Let's just use African Americans as an example. You got those for it and those not.
Cost. Here in Tennessee, we have the highest COVID rate. I think of people being selfish. We have the lowest investment in education. It's incredible going from Minnesota, where there's essentially higher taxes, and I have another twin brother in California, where there are high taxes and good schools and stuff. And here in Tennessee, they vote themselves out of high taxes. They don't want to pay anything in order to get a better life, and they want to keep all the money for themselves, not share, and everybody else be damned. Selfishness.
Tom, what do you think when you hear the word racist, or when you hear the word anti-racist? Either or both. What do you think when you hear those words?
I think of my I think of my neighborhood. I think of Chattanooga. I think of the North and the South, and I think of friends of mine and people who aren't friends of mine.
If reparation is implemented, let's just say for African Americans, or for any group, I guess, because if it's reparations, there's a reason for the reparations from any community. What form of financial number could they put on it? Let's just say each person or each family would get a sum. What is there a number you think they can put on that? Because it comes down to money, as you said. Yeah. So, yeah. Is there a number?
It comes up to $1 trillion or more. I can't think of any number that would do it. That could even come close to an historical accumulation of debt.
How do you feel about a person helping you to research more about your family, and that person is from a cultural community that has known not to just have conflict, but do just horrendous things to your community, their ancestors? So you got ancestors being abused by another set of ancestors, and now we have descendants. How do you feel?
My family was very Catholic, is very Catholic. And I consider that every Catholic church, every Christian church is an embassy of the colonizer on reservation land, and that all of our genealogical records at Standing Rock, it was held by the Church of St. Peter's. And then, and of my great grandmother and great grandfather, I can't remember, were married, baptized, and then married by the apostle of the Catholic Church, Pierre Jean de Smet. And when the Mormons were going through Ponca land and they overwintered with the Ponca, the Mormons started keeping records of the families. And of course, now the Mormons have the records, the Catholic Church has our records, and the US government has very much our genealogical records from all the land deals. So they own it, and I don't like it. And all the access to them is controlled, very controlled. The white Mormon women don't answer my requests. The National Archives are closed down right now, and the Catholic Church is under siege. And dang if they'll let anybody go in and see their records right now, especially on a reservation. So I like it when my cousins do their research. My white cousins do it on the Kunish and Dunbar side of the family. I've seen white people help with Native American genealogy. I'm not such a fan of that. I know one woman is doing it with, one white woman is doing it because of her relationship to a family that was hurt by Native Americans. And so she's very knowledgeable, but it kind of comes at a price.
Well, I thank you for that, Tom. Just one last question before you go. Do you have any advice for others who are doing their own family genealogy? Any advice or words of wisdom for them?
I like, well, in Tennessee here, we have a woman named Tania Kuntz, who's African-American and is part of the African-American Historical and Genealogical Society. We have on Facebook Standing Rock Genealogy Group. And so for people interested in doing it, I'd say get involved with a ethnic or racial group that you feel good with and can help you. And it's wide open. And I also think that anybody who claims to be Native American should get that DNA test, like you said you did, and see if it's true or not, because I think people are using it to escape responsibility.
Okay. Thank you, Tom, for being here today, and I hope you can stick around for our
Thank you.
circus. Thank you so much for that. Wow. So I appreciate the guests that we've had so far. And next up, we will have Kay Prentice. Kay, are you there with us today?
I am.
Oh, great. You all can silently read a little bit about Kay. I don't know if they can bring it full screen so you can see it well. I don't see you yet, Kay, but I hear your voice. Maybe your camera. There you go. There you go. All right. Give the audience just a second. I might want to bring it full screen a little bit bigger. Kay, just want to know how you feeling right now? How are you feeling?
Well, there's a little bit of a fast heartbeat. I'm an introvert, so it's always a little anxious to be with people, but this idea of yours has been intriguing to me since you first talked about it. So I'm also feeling stimulated and humbled, very much humbled, and very, very grateful for the opportunity to be here and to listen mostly.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much.
I'd like to ask you a little bit about your cultural identity, your background, where did you grow up, your lineage. I've known you for some years, but I don't know this about you. So I'm excited to hear a little bit about your family lineage.
So what's important first, I guess, is I need to acknowledge that I'm a settler, a white person who has benefited from the way that power is structured in this culture, that I currently live on land that was held by Dakota people and Anishinaabe people in Minnesota. But I was born in northern New York, a little town called Chateauguay, and that's land that was held by the Akwesasne people. And I'm also a cisgendered woman. It's interesting because so much about my identity I've only come to understand in how it relates to the world that I lived in in a much deeper way in the last 5 years. So I live currently in St. Paul, Minnesota, and I was born and raised in this tiny community that is on the Canadian border, just south of Montreal. It's a part of New York State that most people don't even know exists, and it about 30 miles from the current Akwesasne reservation. But growing up, there was no interaction between my communities. When I was growing up, we didn't interact much more than 10 miles away, and there was no interaction between my community that I know of and the Native community that was so close to us. That area was settled by people from the British Isles largely, and French. There were a lot of French-speaking people. Went to high school with some people who spoke French at home, and a lot of the border wasn't the Canadian border at that time was pretty permeable, so there was a lot of back and forth between. And I grew up on television from Montreal, Hockey Night in Canada, because the only clear signal that we got was, so it was unusual for my particular period, but very much grew up with all of the settler teachings. All of the settler teachings. It has been a profound journey for me to now look back at the way I was taught history and social studies, and I see some things that are different now, which is hopeful to me in what's being taught in schools my grandchildren go to. What else about me?
Okay. What about your family research? Have anyone in your family or you did research on your family tree, and about how far could they go back? Do you know?
I have not myself. My mother talked about others in the family, an aunt of hers who had traced us back to the Mayflower. On my mother's side, there's no denying our responsibility as settlers, because there was one line that was traced back to the Mayflower. On my father's side, it's about, I mean, he was maybe second generation. His father was Irish, and my mother, calculating the years that his family came, always figured that it was the famine, the Irish famine that brought my father's family to the US. So on his side, I'm not as familiar with the ancestors going back. My mother was quite conscious of her lineage, particularly on her mother's side. And so I knew I had a great grandmother who lived until I was in college. And I knew where her parents lived because it was a small, very rural community. And I knew where her parents lived. I knew they had a butter factory. There was information that was commonly talked about in my family about particularly that line, my mother's mother or mother's family. And on her father's side, her grandmother was French Canadian. I think her grandfather was English. And one of her grandfathers on her mother's side was Dutch. So it's a combination of various European roots, but primarily coming from the Ireland, Scotland, and England.
Thank you. Gonna ask you a tough one. Have you ever considered or imagined what your life would be like if you were born in a different race?
I haven't ever assumed that I really know what that would be. What I am conscious of is, and more in recent years, is that my life wouldn't be like it is. Okay, and in particular, I don't think any person of color would have been able to have the journey that I've had in the work that I do. And that's just something that I'm conscious of, that because my journey in this work was very accidental. Wasn't anything I set out to do. And so I don't have any formal education really related to it. I have a university degree, but not related at all. And so I've been able to have this incredible experience in the work that I do. It's been so meaningful. And I'm keenly aware that for a person of color, they probably could not have had the opportunities that I've had without all the paper that normally comes, the degrees that you have to have. And it has made me extremely conscious in the field that I'm in. I've always been concerned when people start talking about requiring certain kinds of certification or formal education or things like that in order to do this work, because I'm really aware that closes out people of color and closes out people who just have skills naturally, don't necessarily need a lot of formal education to be able to do what we're talking about in the restorative justice work and the circle work. So it's not so much I imagine myself, in a different race, but that I have become really conscious of what exists in my life. And COVID has just really driven that home, right? That things I'm conscious of and by contrast, in a way, that one of the things that COVID has done for those of us who had relatively stable lives was create this incredible instability in our lives. And then in that instability, at some point, I'm able to observe that this is what a lot of other people live with all the time. And so many of us are finding this, really challenging and really difficult, but this is, and it is the work that's been done in the last decade by people of color that have, and some white people who've been very insightful, that have really allowed me to begin to have a lens that can pay attention to that, because it was not an awareness I had as a young person.
Okay. My next question is it's kind of a long-winded question. And it's two parts. Have you ever been told by someone in your family to be careful tracing your family tree, because you might not know what would fall out of it? And that leads me to, what would be the most challenging news for you to accept about your ancestors? What would be the most challenging news for you to accept about your ancestors?
Nobody in my experience ever suggested, any concern about tracing ancestors. That wasn't ever present in my own experience. And this question of, because we got a chance to see the kinds of questions that would be used ahead of time. So I looked at this question and I started thinking about it. Okay, what would be really, really hard for me to live with, to reconcile with in my own ancestry? And I thought about what I thought about was various forms of oppression, right? If I found that somewhere in the history that people had owned slaves, that would be hard. That if I found somewhere in my own history that my people had been a party to burning witches, that those forms of intolerance and disrespect for other human beings are the things that I care so much about in our world today. And then I started thinking about, right, so if it's there, and it easily could be, right, because we all have shadow, right? And then I started thinking about my own shadow. What's hard to face in my own shadow? And I've been taught by a Native American woman by the name of Tanaga, a very, very important guide and mentor in my journey, the idea that when we work on our own healing in the here and now, in this time, that it opens the door for the ancestors to heal. And so we've been in spaces together. We were in a training together in Canada where a woman was thinking about, because Tanaga talked about ancestors, and there was a woman with German ancestors who was just overwhelmed by the pain of being affiliated with Nazi activities in Germany. And Tanaga, talked to us about the idea that the healing work we do in this time can open the door for healing for our ancestors. And so that's where I went to in thinking about, right, so if there are horrible things that have happened in the past that my ancestors were part of, then it's a part of my work in this time to be doing healing, both in myself and supporting healing collectively, that will allow that past to be healed at the same time. It is for me a very hopeful concept.
Thank you so much for that. I've been saving the tough ones, okay? This one tough. It's tough for me to ask. Do you think, I'm gonna say a person in an imaginary world, do you think a person should help pay for reparations if they knew their family never owned slaves? Yeah, it's tough, I know. Do you think?
Actually, I don't consider that very tough.
Oh, good, excellent.
Because every white person in this country, whether their family ever owned slaves or not, has benefited from the fact that slavery existed. And not only that slavery existed, but the impacts of slavery still affect the world that we live in today. So I benefit on a daily basis, and not just from people, from families that can trace to slavery, but from the way African immigrants are treated in this country and their experiences. And so, yeah, for me, it's a question of, did you benefit? The answer is yes. Then you're part of the process of repair and healing. And so I don't think there's anybody living in this country who wasn't either affected or benefited by the existence of racism. And so I do think the question of reparations, it engages every single one of us in some role in this process of thinking about reparations.
Well, my last question to you is, as a pioneer in this work of restorative practices, what excites you about this work and restorative practices and principles? What excites you?
So the vision that I have for restorative justice, that, you know, it evolved over the years in various ways. But my vision is about deep cultural transformation toward a culture in which we live well together. And that would mean equal distribution of power, equal distribution, or equal, yeah. And it isn't a question of everybody gets exactly the same thing, right? It is a question of what serves your well-being might be different than what serves my well-being, but that we are structured in a way that we pay attention to every single person's well-being in the community, the nation, whatever level that you're looking at. So for me, restorative justice is a vision of a way to function collectively such that we attend to both individual well-being of every single individual and collective well-being, and that we share power, we share love. And so that's in the very broad sense, that it also distills down to very particular events and experiences where harm may happen, and there needs to be a way to work through that harm and find a way to move toward healing for everybody who was impacted. And that started for me in the criminal justice system, you know, around events we call crimes, but all kinds of harms happen in our world, many of which are never called crimes. And in that work, and it was always for me positive work, right? It's about moving toward using a process to respond to harm that moves us toward being able to live in a way that causes less harm. So that prevention is always woven into the intervention that you might use in a specific situation for restorative justice. And that in that working at, the very individual event level of crime, we worked through big questions of what's it like to be victimized and what do victims need. We worked through the questions of what happens with somebody who caused harm and what do they need to heal, and how do we engage collective accountability as well as individual accountability. These were the conversations we were working through for street level crime. And then I began to realize that the lessons that we were learning, many of those applied to the issue of racism in a way that offered what I thought was a more constructive way forward than what had happened up until then. That one of the things that restorative justice offers us is understanding around what it's like if you've been the recipient of harm and what people need. And they need to be heard. They need to be heard again and again and again. They need to be validated that what happened to them was wrong. And they need to be deeply listened to. And I realized, even though a lot of the events we're talking about, there are current events, but there are also a lot of historical events of harm, that all of those things can still be done, even though those happened, hundreds of years ago, that the things, that there are very concrete things that we can do that meet the needs of people who've been deeply harmed and oppressed. And that from there, we can begin to have the conversation about what does healing look like? And healing definitely includes reparations. And I like to think of looking at reparations in terms of mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual, right? On each of those dimensions, what is it that we might do that is, because in restorative justice, we talk about direct repair or symbolic repair, that sometimes symbolic repair is very meaningful. And I agree strongly with what someone said earlier, saying it's not a one size fits all thing, right? So some people might like to have someone research their family, and somebody else is like, don't touch it. I don't want that at all. But that if we start to reach into our creativity and really listen, right, that in restorative justice, whatever steps are taken for repair are decided in dialogue. It's not like somebody says, oh, this is what it's going to be. It's going to be a certain amount of money, or it's going to be a certain thing that happens. It's the people directly involved who get to decide what is it that would have meaning for reparations. And so what energizes me is that I think these ideas offer us a way forward that that can really, really help us move toward healing. And that's a heart spirit space.
Thank you so much, Kay. Thank you for being here and the words that you left in this space. I thank you so much. With that, I also like to just go back and thank Michelle, Dreesen, Tom, and again, Kay, for being our guest. We're going to turn it over now to Nikita and Maria. They will talk about the break, the book giveaway, so don't go anywhere yet, and the evals. And so tag team, we will turn it over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I do believe it is afternoon where everyone is. I'm on the East Coast. So I know separately you are coming to us from the Central Time Zone and other time zones. So wherever you are, I hope you're having a great and wonderful Friday. If you are like me, you have been engaged and informed and mesmerized and had the wheels turning from our first 4 guests. As a part of today's forum, I just have to thank all of you and echo Janice's thanks for your presence here, your words here, and being in this space and giving us all food for thought and a little bit more gas for our personal fires in looking at restorative, looking at all of the topics that we are speaking to today around restorative. family tree. So first, we would like to get your thoughts on these first 4 speakers in the form of an evaluation. And Nikita from our tech team is going to be dropping in the chat a link to a Google Doc that is a chance for you to give your thoughts and feedback on our first session, first half of the day, or first part of the day. And we'd like to give you about a minute, 2 minutes to go in and do that evaluation. This is the opportunity for us to learn what really touched you and what you really enjoyed about today. We value your opinion, and we invite you to click on that link in the chat and complete the evaluation.
It might seem crazy what I'm about to say. Sunshine, she's here, you can take a break. I'm a hot air balloon that could go to space. With the air, like I don't care, baby, by the way. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like a room without a roof. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like happiness is the truth. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you know what happiness is to you. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like that's what you want to do. Here come bad news, talking this and that. Well, give me all you got and don't hold it back. Well, I should probably warn you, I'll be just fine. No offense to you, don't waste your time. Here's why. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like a room without a roof. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like happiness is the truth. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you know what happiness is to you. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like that's what you want to do. Hey, go. Bring me down. Can't nothing bring me down. Your love is too high to bring me down. Can't nothing bring me down. I said, bring me down. Can't nothing bring me down. Your love is too high to bring me down. Can't nothing bring me down. I said, clap along if you feel like a room without a roof. Clap along if you feel like happiness is the truth. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you know what happiness is to you. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like.
Thank you all for giving your feedback on those Google form, on that Google form. You know that if you needed a little more time, those forms will be open, and you'll be able to add whatever thoughts you may have about the day, so we can collect those from you. Now we are going to do a book giveaway. I think you all know that this project is in tandem with the Restorative Tree book, Colorizing Restorative Justice. And there on the screen, you will see a wheel of names. The names are of all of our participants, our registrants in today's call. And we will give that wheel a spin, and the name that is selected, you will be contacted. If we don't already have your address, we probably got your address when you registered, but we will follow up with you and put in the mail a book to Becky McCammon. Becky McCammon, congratulations. You are the winner of the Colorizing Restorative Justice book. We will have that in the mail to you. She is like, thank you, smiley face in the chat. I see, congratulations. We'll get that on the mail to you. Now we are currently at 2:52. And so we are going to do a 20-minute break, which means we will come back at 3:12, if I'm doing my math correctly. So if you guys would like to turn off cameras, get a bite to eat, take care of you, self-care. And we will see you back at 3:12.
Hot air balloon that could go to space. With the air, like I don't care, baby, by the way. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like a room without a roof. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like happiness is the truth. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you know what happiness is to you. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like that's what you want to do. Here come bad news, talking this and that. Well, give me all you got and don't hold it back. Well, I should probably warn you, I'll be just fine. No offense to you, don't waste your time. Here's why. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like a room without a roof. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like happiness is the truth. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you know what happiness is to you. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like that's what you want to do. Hey, bring me down, can't nothing bring me down. The love is too high.